Have you looked into the data at all for Sweden? Because I remember early on in the pandemic, I had my eye on them, but I wasn't necessarily looking at the specific the data. But they opted not to have a lockdown. I'm not sure what they did with mask mandates, but it's my understanding. I think that they're pretty much exactly where we're at when it comes to numbers, deaths, cases, uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and but economically they weren't. They didn't have all the collateral damage.
At one point, I actually looked at their economic decline. I think it was for 2020 in comparison with other countries, and it was less. They were still affected, of course, through international connections, but it was less. And yeah, my view, I haven't followed them closely. I've lost a couple of friends or connections early on when I mentioned Sweden as a positive example, like around May or June 2020, maybe on Facebook. And then I think it went up and down. Comparisons that were made with their neighboring countries, there were good reasons that they weren't fair. So Norway doing
Mm.
better, but then there were aspects about the demographic makeup that would perfectly explain that Sweden had some more troubles. They didn't do well with their elderly either. But yeah, I don't think they had restrictions. They did close high schools, from what I recall, but not middle and lower. I don't think they had mask mandates anywhere. They reduced capacity in restaurants but didn't close them. So they had measures. I think when you actually look at this, what's it called? There's a metric for the restrictions, kind of a lockdown intensity. I forget now how it's called. It's made by Oxford University. Sweden actually isn't that much below most other countries, but significantly and politically, I think they were pretty much the only ones who said we need to keep in mind what's coming next. How are we going to get out of the restrictions? What's
Mm.
the goalpost to get
Yeah.
out of restrictions? Their guy Anders Tegnell predicted, I guess, or could foresee that it would be difficult to set a goal and after that to end the measures. So he didn't enter the measures to begin with. That's kind of this longer term thinking that we were talking about at the beginning. I remember he said in interviews, we need to look at total mortality at the end of the year. And then I personally realize even mortality, excess mortality in particular, is actually a modeled number. It's not a real data value. So even that is hard to use as a metric, which tells me that this is more political and to be decided as a political, societal, philosophical question than really an engineering type question with solutions.
Just to touch on that for a moment, you said earlier that you don't believe in the sort of malevolence theory, um, or the malevolence hypothesis, but um, I believe it's still true in Canada that each province is still living under a state of, or at least a functional state of emergency with the renewal of the the various different pieces of legislation that govern the reopening, post emergency extensions. Um, I believe that's still the case, and it feels almost like a repeat of 9/11 or something like that, where the new rules come in, the new restrictions come in, and then they don't leave, and maybe they had no intention to leave. Do you see those lifting at all?
Well, I have to say yes. Otherwise, I don't know. I could live with the answer. Um, I'm always trying to understand the other side. So, like, just to make sure that I
Mm,
didn't miss anything in the news, I looked at CTV News, or one of the mainstream news, just before this, before talking to you, and I've already forgotten, but like, I don't know, 1,600 people with COVID in Ontario in hospital now, 200 in ICU. I forget what the capacities are and so on, but it's a significant number, right? And then a couple of paragraphs down, you actually read in the mainstream media, it's 45% of the hospitalizations are actually because of COVID. So the majority, small majority, 55% are incidental findings. I mean, that's good that they report that now, although they shouldn't put the total number in the headline, I think. So it's really only 800 or so COVID patients in hospital, not 1,600. But it's been on the rise. So now, because they like public health and others are in that, I think they're kind of, how can you say that, they're under the spell of their own narrative, and so they see
mm.
that new wave coming, and I mean, to them it's obvious that it's not over yet. And like, I guess what would be needed for that is to really understand, and then promote the understanding that this is, after all, or at this stage maybe, just another respiratory virus, and that there's always been, so 28 people died from of, or are recorded as having died from or with COVID today as well. You know how many were recorded or would have been recorded if we had looked from the flu on a day in April 2019 or 2017 or 2018, when there were larger flu waves. Um,
Mm.
so, but back, like, to the other perspective, the emergency, I believe they don't want to make a mistake, and they're afraid of making a mistake. They're afraid of lifting too early and then be blamed by the very loud uh, complainers and COVID zealots for additional death. So yeah, it would also require us to rethink, like, responsibilities for, like, who is responsible for our survival here. I mean, I'm not someone who's looking to, how's it called, like, into survival out in the wilderness or anything, but like within in the city here, I mean, I think my health and my nutrition and, I don't know, my sleep and so on, that's my personal responsibility. I don't really, I have to figure that out as a grown up person, as a part of the process. And
Yeah, I the personal responsibility um, angle is one I tend to subscribe to myself, but usually when employed, um, the uh, what comes back is usually something along the lines of, but some people just simply don't have the capacity for personal responsibility. You know, the society needs to satisfy people's needs um, to some degree.
interesting, but how did that work out, right? Did we protect those people very well during those last 2 years? And you
Yeah.
know, I have, yeah, as you said, I've written lots of small pieces mostly for my blogs. I've
Hmm.
kind of, for example, looked at a mainstream article and tried to dispel what they were saying or counter that. And one of the articles that I still have sitting there is I don't remember, maybe Globe and Mail or one of those newspapers saying you shouldn't believe people who tell you that taking vitamins and nutritional supplements improves your health. That something like that is the title. Like that's the opposite of what public health has been telling us till 2019, and public health was criticized by us for not emphasizing the vitamin D need that has been kind of advertised in the sense of helping people to be more self-reliant with their health, right? We're talking about helping people take charge of their own health, right? So okay, you make them aware that many Canadians have vitamin D deficit. That's what public health did until 2019, and now they're disputing that because they don't want people to think that that's enough to do instead of following um, other advice which is one size fits all, has no individual medical risk benefit analysis, and all those things that are also, and by the way, informed consent and informed choice, all those things that I was taking for granted until 2019 as well.
I think another angle on that might be it's just it might be an excuse for those who are more privileged not to intervene in any other way, like for society not to intervene in the lives of those individuals um, who are being advised to just take these simple measures. Even though that seems to me to be kind of roundabout and disingenuous, I do think that that's probably behind it to some degree.
And so you were talking about the malevolence in terms of why the emergency situation would be still kept up. Yeah. So, like I said, I still believe it's explicable through professional fear in a way, and the I guess taking on too much of that responsibility. Public health kind of made itself responsible for individual health. And yeah, if you think of it, that is not the role of public health. Public health, their task is to look at population health, not individual health.
Mm.
And they and the medical bodies have stripped doctors, individual doctors, of that responsibility or task to help us with our individual health by telling them they cannot give certain advice, and they can't even treat COVID patients. Send them back, and if they get worse, get them into hospital, but not treat them individually. That is completely wrong, and it should be obvious to anyone that this is
Hmm.
wrong.